Good morning. On behalf of the California ISO, I'd like to welcome you to the 2020 Process Enhancements Phase 1 Initiative meeting to discuss the final proposal and draft tariff language, which were posted on April 26th. My name is Elisandra Casillas, representing the Stakeholder Affairs Group here at the ISO, and I'll be facilitating today's meeting. I'm also joined by Bob Emmert, Senior Manager, Interconnection Resources, and Bill Weaver. The presentation and other materials related can be found on the initiative webpage. Next slide, please. Some housekeeping reminders. This call is being recorded and the video file will be posted on the initiative webpage for information and convenience purposes only. The recordings and any related transcriptions should not be reprinted without the ISO's permission. The meeting is structured to stimulate dialogue and engage different perspectives. Please keep comments professional and respectful. Also, please try and be brief and refrain from repeating what has already been said so we can manage the time efficiently. Next slide, please. We will pause for questions periodically throughout the meeting. You can raise your hand by selecting the hand icon above the chat window in WebEx, or if you've joined via audio only, please press #2 on your device. Please remember to state your name and affiliation first. If you need technical assistance during today's meeting, please feel free to send a chat to the event producer. You may also send your questions via chat to all panelists. Next slide, please. This graphic depicts the ISO stakeholder process. We are currently in the final proposal phase of the stakeholder process, and I will review the next steps in the process at the end of this presentation. Next slide, please. For today's agenda, after I'm finished with the welcome and introduction and the stakeholder process, I'll turn it over to Bob Emmert, who will discuss the background, followed by Phase 1 process enhancements, the schedule and final questions, along with tariff changes with Bill Weaver, followed by a lunch break from noon to 1. When we return, we will have an additional discussion if needed. From here, I will now turn the meeting over to Bob Emmert.
To the next slide. Oh, thank you for unmuting me. Let's go ahead and move to the next slide. Thank you. So good morning, everybody. Hopefully everybody's doing well. So the focus of this stakeholder call is the IPE Phase 1 final proposal, which is dealing with primarily near-term enhancements. The Phase 1 process or changes in this proposal focus on Cluster 14 enhancements to be implemented for the post-Phase 1 study process, TPD allocation enhancements to be implemented for the 2022-23 allocation cycle, a new emergency generation process triggered by a state mandate for new generation under a declaration of emergency conditions, and minor changes that enhance the GitApp in various ways. Phase 2 will be focusing on resolving longer-term modifications and broader reforms, seeking to align the interconnection process with procurement activities of the load serving entities and others. And the next paper is planned to be published on June 6th. And additional items requiring state agency coordination and data transparency is being addressed outside of the IPE process. And the first data transparency stakeholder workshop was held on April 5th, and comments have been received. So next slide, please. And we'll move into the Phase 1 process enhancement.
Bob, you already have a question.
Okay, let's stop for questions.
All right. Susan, your line is unmuted. You may go ahead.
Yeah, hi, Bob. Susan Schneider, consulting. Just a really quick question about the data transparency workshop. We're wondering, do you have any idea, is there any further process on that particular track and what might be happening next or when that might be happening?
Well, Jason Foster, I believe, is the one running that one. So I'm not quite involved to know what the schedule is. Deb, do you happen to know?
Yeah, So Susan, at the moment, we're trying to go through all of the comments that were received and line them up as to the different responses to the different types of data requests. So we're in the process of analyzing that at this point. And then once we get a chance to analyze that, there have been a lot of things going on at the ISO over the last 2 weeks. So yes, we're hoping to get more into that next week and the following week. And then based on that analysis, we'll go ahead and you can probably look for something probably towards the paper coming out, I imagine like the 3rd week of May, with a meeting a week or 2 after that.
Okay, great. Thanks very much.
Sure.
All right, any other questions on that introduction? Okay, I see that we're on slide 9, thank you. So this slide presents the final proposal for the transmission plan deliverability allocation process, where no changes have been made to the broadly supported TPD allocation groups A through C. And I will note that in the final proposal, we switched from number designations for the allocation groups to letters, so that we will make it easier to designate or delineate between the new allocation groups and the old or current allocation group, as projects that already are allocated under those groups will still be using that terminology. So Group A is for active or operational projects demonstrating a site exclusivity, or excuse me, an existing executed PPA, the Group B is for shortlisted PPAs, and Group C is for projects that have achieved commercial operations. There is one proposed revision to allocation Group D, which was originally Group 4. Projects that have exhausted their opportunities under Group D would be converted to energy only versus being required to withdraw at that point, which was what was in the draft final proposal. And proposed revisions to the PPA requirements include reducing the minimum required contract term for PPAs contracting for RA capacity from 5 to 3 years. And instead of giving priority to PPAs with load-serving entities having an RA obligation versus large customers, all entities with PPAs will be treated the same in the TPT allocation process. So with that, let's stop for questions.
All right, we do have questions in queue. Susan, your line is unmuted. You may go ahead.
Hi, Bob. Susan Schneider, Phoenix Consulting. So I just had a couple of clarifying questions. First of all, I want to say that switching to letters was a really good idea, and so I think that will avoid a lot of confusion, so I'm really glad you guys did that. I have a couple of questions about the Group 4, just as clarifying questions, and then one question about the minimum term. It's a little unclear to me in the proposal whether if someone there's some restrictions around Group 4, like giving up suspension rights and that kind of thing. And so it's a little unclear to me whether those things apply only to, well, a couple things. First of all, does that apply if anyone is seeking, a Group D allocation, or does that apply if someone actually gets a Group D allocation?
Those restrictions come into effect the moment that a project seeks an allocation. So regardless of whether a project receives an allocation under Group D, they are under those restrictions for the entire amount of or for each portion of the project if it's got multiple portions.
Okay, so a couple of things. First of all, what is the reason why if a project is only seeking that allocation, if they don't get it, they would still be subject to those restrictions?
Well, that was something that we felt was an appropriate process to continue to help projects either continue to move through the queue process based on their original CODs and so forth, rather than stick around the way some projects can and continue to modify over time and sticking into the queue longer than when they're they're not really moving forward. So that was something we made a decision for at the very beginning to help projects either come online or get out of the way for other projects.
If they proceed on the trajectory they were already on, if they don't get an award, how is that a bad thing?
Well, the issue is continuing to change CODs and remain in the queue where they've got upgrades that they may be sharing with others, and you know, the issues dealing with whether a particular upgrade is a CAN-U or a PNU, you know, continues to linger. So it can cause problems for later projects as projects linger in a queue, not moving forward.
Okay, because there's a provision that says if they get a partial award, they can refuse that award, and it will be, I forgot the exact words, but it's as though it never happened, you know, one of those, it's terminology like that. But if they have had to give up a whole bunch of things just for having asked, then it's not as though they never asked or it never happened. So I'm a little confused about, is it as though just the award didn't happen, but whatever restrictions they got just for asking, that still as though it happened? Or can you just clarify that?
Yes. Yeah, there was some questions and concerns in the comments related to if someone got an allocation for less than the amount that they were asking for. And allocations could be all the way down to 1 megawatt. It's something I did check with the engineers, and they could be down to that minimal level. So we wanted to give projects the opportunity that if they get an allocation of less than what they were asking for, they can reject that allocation and then continue to move forward as if they hadn't gotten an allocation versus if a project gets a full allocation and they don't receive or don't accept it, they are required to withdraw.
Okay, so they're required to withdraw, but not just be converted to energy only.
Yes, if you come into Group D, get a full allocation, and decide not to accept the allocation, then you would be required to withdraw.
Do you withdraw just the capacity you asked for, or do you have to withdraw your entire project?
The entire project.
Entire project. Okay. So what you're saying, let me see if I can summarize. I don't want to take too much time on this, obviously, but so when you say it's as though it never happened, all the restrictions that are imposed because they asked for it, meaning they lose suspension, those things, that would still be as though it happened. But when you say as though it had never happened, that would mean they did not have to withdraw; they could still continue. That's correct. Okay. All right. Okay. And then the last two more questions, really quick, but. The energy only treatment is a little confusing. It's the energy only energy only assignments I understand come after the groups the projects that are still FCDS or PCDS because they've got LDNUs and the EO projects can't trigger any DNUs. Well, when you say the EO projects come after, the allocations them come after the allocations to the FCDS or PCDS projects. Is that within each group? Like for Group A, you would assign, any allocations first to the PCDS, FCDS projects, and then the EO, and then for Group B, you would start, sort of do that order again? Or do you go through Group A, B, C, D, and then the EO projects, or where do they fit into that?
Yeah, I thought that was spelled out in the paper, that it is on a per group basis. So we'll do the allocation for allocation group A will go first, and we'll allocate as much as we can through that process, and then assuming there's some left over, we'll go to Group B. So there are energy-only projects that we have an executed BPA in Group A. They will receive an allocation before Group B full capacity projects that are shortlisted.
Okay, that's what I thought too, and I thought it was okay, it was clear in the proposal, but I wasn't sure after I looked at the tariff language, so I just wanted to clarify that. And finally, my last question, at least in this area, it used to be for Group 2 for retention, that you had to go, you had to have obviously be shortlisted or active in negotiations, and the next year you had to come in with an executed PPA, and then the next year you had to come in with regulatory approval. Now, does that still apply to Group B as well?
We have removed the regulatory approval requirement for all types of allocations.
Okay, all right.
So
I was going to ask about Group D as well for that. So, okay, so you've just taken that out?
Yes.
Okay. And that's because almost everybody gets it, or it's just not necessary, or what's the?
Well, we felt that was primarily a simplification process, and for the most part, yes, people do get that regulatory approval once they have an executed PPA.
Okay. Okay.
And
then,
Susan, did you see the Excel spreadsheet that was posted that has the examples?
I did, and that's very helpful. Thank you. I did think it was interesting that it's so complicated that you needed 22 examples, but that
surprised me as well.
Yeah. So no, I think that's helpful, and appreciate you guys taking the time to do that. I just have one question on the PPA requirements. Then, can you just explain, because I'm having trouble articulating to people who have asked me about it, why there's never been a minimum contract term for PPAs, and what is there a particular problem or concern that you have, or why is, after all the years that this has actually been in effect, why is the CAISO now coming back thinking there needs to be a minimum term?
Well, in part because we have been asked by entities quite often, what is the minimum term? So we thought we should, define that. We thought it should be more than 1 year because we are giving transmission plan deliverability to projects for the life of their projects, and we want to, make sure that that capacity is going to be utilized for, significant periods of time, for the life of that project, hopefully. So we thought it would be worthwhile to go ahead and have a minimum term. We think 3 years is a pretty low threshold, but that's what we think is the best way for moving forward.
Okay. I would ask you just to think about one thing, and we're going to do some more thoughts about this too, but the idea that, when a project has to find replacement capacity for some reason, and this may be more of an issue if it turns out that, for some of the storage, especially where people are having to guarantee RA values for periods of time, or have to provide replacement capacity. If all the RA is tied up, it may be difficult for people to find that. Whereas RA, I think that may be contracted under certain arrangements might be more available on shorter term time frames. So anyway, just the idea of if someone has to do replacement RA, particularly it's required now for outages for RA capacity, then where are they going to find that exactly? So anyway, just some thought about that given the new requirement. So anyway, that's it. That's all I've got. Thanks very much. Appreciate your patience on these.
Okay. Are there any other questions?
Yes, we're going to move to the next question in queue. We do have a caller on our regular dial-in line. Caller, your line is unmuted. You may go ahead.
Good morning. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you. This is Rayanne Quadro on behalf of EDFR this morning. I just wanted to chime in and express support for the item that Susan brought up about why we're moving forward with the Allocation Group D restriction for projects that are seeking the allocation. I just don't understand why it hurts to ask, basically. I understand, the complications of queue management, not wanting folks to continue to move their CODs and stuff, but it seems like seeking the allocation shouldn't be the driver of the penalties. Why not allow a project to sort of leave without those restrictions to the extent that they don't get the TPD allocation? All of your other tariff items still apply in terms of MMAs, PTO delays, and all of that.
Well, my answer is really the same as it was before. I guess maybe the only thing I might add is Allocation Group D is somewhat tailored for projects that feel they are ready to move forward and move forward within the timelines that they provide in their interconnection request. There is no requirement to utilize Group 4 or Group 3, or excuse me, D.
of course, there's no requirement, Bob, but I think Allocation Group D is also a replacement for what Allocation Group 3 was doing before, which was allowing developers to come in and see if there is any TPD available for them where they've situated their project and then go market it from there, making the TPD come before the PPA, right? To say that it's just for projects that are ready to move forward, I guess it doesn't solve that problem of allowing people to choose which comes first in their development timeline.
Well, I would categorize it a little bit differently, that Group 4 really isn't a replacement or a restructuring of Allocation Group 3. It's really a different thought process behind it. So, we felt that we didn't need to, stick exactly the way Allocation Group 3 was before.
Okay, well, understood. Thank you for your time, and I will provide my comments in writing in case you want to respond. Thank you so much.
All right, we're moving to the next question in queue. Songji, your line is unmuted. You may go ahead.
Good morning, Bob.
Good morning.
On behalf of Energy Association. First, I want
Sanja, I can barely hear you. If you could speak up or get closer to the mic.
Is this better?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. Song Jeju from Greenbright, represent California Energy Association. First, I want to echo the concern about those restrictions for seeking of the allocation. I just want to add that Group D project may not receive allocation due to lack of transmission. So if they can't get allocation, it's reasonable that they have to adjust their project development accordingly. So that may include changing COD. They may continue trying until they get TPD, and so the COD may be pushed out. So something for ISO to consider. And then I have a clarifying question on Group D. In the draft final proposal, it's mentioned that Group A or B, if they didn't receive allocation, they park, then the next cycle they couldn't use Group D. So it's not clear in the final proposal and the draft tariff language. So I just want to clarify if that's still the case.
So are you referring to a project that, if someone's in Group A or B, they're in
they didn't get the first cycle, so they parked.
Yeah. So
the next cycle, could they use Group D?
But wouldn't they still have their PPA, or are you saying they've lost their PPA?
Yeah, they may have lost the PPA or not shortlisted anymore. So then could they use Group D in the second cycle?
Yeah, I think that's a possibility, that if they do not get an allocation and lose their whatever they what made them eligible for either Group A or B, that they could utilize Group D later, as long as they're still eligible as full capacity and are coming out of parking versus have already been converted to energy only.
Okay, thank you.
All right, we are moving to the next question in queue. Ian, your line is unmuted. You may go ahead.
Hi, can you hear me all right?
Yes.
Cool. Hi, this is Ian Kearney, speaking on behalf of Golden State Clean Energy. I also have a clarifying question on Group D regarding the requirements and restrictions. So there's a reference on page 13 of the paper saying that essentially these requirements and restrictions attach to the entire project if you're seeking, but they don't apply to a portion of the project that may have received deliverability via Groups A and B. Would this, but I mean, that makes sense for projects just coming out of phase 2 that may be applying to multiple groups. But in this fall, where it's wide open to almost all projects, including later stage projects that have added capacity with an MMA, And so those projects, if they have deliverability, it wouldn't have been A or B, and it wouldn't even necessarily be the legacy equivalents of those groups 1, 2, 4, and 5. So shouldn't it be that that exception to the Group D restrictions applies to any project that has any deliverability allocated, regardless of how that deliverability was previously allocated?
Yes, that's the case. So if they've got deliverability and they're coming in to seek an allocation for a portion of their project that doesn't, the part of the project that has and has retained deliverability will not be under the restrictions for Group D.
Okay, so that would even apply to really old projects that have like balance sheet financing still going on, correct?
Yes.
Okay. Great, that was my only question. Thank you.
All right, we do not have any additional questions in queue at this time.
Okay, let's move on to the next slide. So for the final proposal for the site exclusivity proposal, to summarize the stakeholder feedback, 10 stakeholders fully supported the proposal as is. 3 stakeholders suggested more stringent requirements, such as suggesting site exclusivity be required to enter phase 2 studies or for cluster 14, and also phase 1 studies for cluster 15 and later. 3 stakeholders suggested less stringent requirements, suggesting a lower percentage of the site exclusivity deposit be at risk or only at risk after phase 1 studies. So the proposal has not changed, which is that for cluster 14, site exclusivity deposit will be 100% non-refundable after entering phase 2 studies. And for cluster 15 and later, site exclusivity deposits are increased, and 50% is non-refundable after the scoping meeting, and documentation of site exclusivity will be required to enter phase 2 studies. And we feel that this proposal strikes the right balance. So with that, I'll open it up for questions.
Hey, Bob, this is Steve. Just to clarify that if they do show that they have site exclusivity after, those non-refundable periods start, that they would get their full refund.
That's correct. At any point in time that if you demonstrate site exclusivity, you can get your site exclusivity deposit back. So do we have any questions in the queue?
There are currently no questions in queue.
Okay, well, let's move on to the next slide. So for the final proposal for emergency generation process, to summarize the stakeholder feedback, 6 stakeholders fully support the proposal as is. 3 stakeholders support the proposal but had lingering concerns. 1 stakeholder requested further clarification that if the CPUC can declare an emergency, and this was clarified, closing that potential loophole. 1 stakeholder fully opposes the proposal, suggesting it might be misused by PTOs by the CPUC. So in the clarifications in the final proposal are that the ISO will accept emergency generation study requests only pursuant to a specific emergency state mandate from the governor, and only for interconnections in addition specifically designated by a state agency, not including counties, municipalities, or CCAs. And additional requirements prohibit impacts to the cost or timing of current queued projects. And these adjustments and clarifications are made to address stakeholder concerns. So with that, I'll open it for questions.
There are currently no questions in queue.
Okay, let's move to slide 12. Okay, so for the final proposal for modifications allowed for parked projects, to summarize the stakeholder feedback, 6 stakeholders fully supported the proposal as is. 3 stakeholders supported the proposal but wanted further revisions. Some to add some modifications that do not require MMAs. Some to add modifications to inverters, and then one to delete the availability for projects to convert to or to change their POI to an MMA. So there was really one clarification made in the final proposal, which is the last bullet, and the ISO. So the proposal is that the ISO accept modification requests for park projects to downsize, change fuel type, change technology type, change the point of interconnection, and we added permissible technology advancements. And we believe the final proposal, along with the current procedures already in place for modifications, encompasses the overall best policy for modifications for parked projects. So with that, are there any questions?
Yes, we do have questions in queue. Susan, your line is unmuted. You may go ahead.
Hey, Bob. Susan Schneider, Phoenix Consulting. Just a couple of things. You did in the proposal acknowledge LSA's proposal to add modifications that don't require an MMA request, which are sort of by definition non-material and sort of trivial. That's our word, not the tariff. But we're just wondering, and so it's acknowledged there, but it doesn't really explain why you rejected it. So I'm just wondering what why that might be.
Okay, well, Debbie, would you like to handle that question?
Sure. Susan, the reason why we didn't accept that as an additional item is the whole idea behind this enhancement is to not do all of the MMAs that are available to a project that is not parked. And we were trying to minimize the number of modifications that a park project could actually do while they're parked. If we added that in, then that's defeating the whole purpose of this portion of the initiative. And we might as well just take the whole thing out and not do anything.
Well, I guess we understood the objective and didn't necessarily disagree with it too much. And, but, you know, we pushed back a little on some of these other things, but we do understand the objective. And that's why the things that don't require an MMA are almost by definition things that don't require really an analysis. And so that's the only reason why we thought maybe that might be acceptable here, because some of the things you have here actually might require at least some little bit of analysis, but the things that don't require an MMA don't really require that. That's why they don't require an MMA. So that's why we thought maybe that might be acceptable, even given understanding the philosophy of what you're trying to do here.
Well, but the other side of the coin is the majority of the park projects generally go ahead and just withdraw, or they radically change based on the deliverability results that they get. Mm-hmm. So, I mean,
go ahead, sorry.
It's a question as to how far do we go, and we felt that this was enough at this time.
Okay, I mean, because, you know, and again, understanding totally what you're trying to do, that's why we thought these things don't require you to do any analysis normally, so they wouldn't require any work here. So that's why we had suggested them.
Yeah, but the MMAs that still require work to be done, it's just a different type of work and not necessarily the engineers doing the work. There's still a group that has to go through and do the assessment to make sure that from a business perspective, it's not an MMA and it does meet all those requirements.
Okay, and then okay, so I have one clarifying question then. Deliverability transfer requests, are those, I mean, I guess, are they technically MMAs, but are they allowed here? Because that would seem like kind of an important thing to be allowed to do. That's normally just, I mean, you can do that with a calculator pretty much, but so yeah. I was wondering if that would be allowed here.
Yeah, deliverability transfers aren't really MMAs.
Okay, so that would be allowed for projects that are parked? Yeah. Okay, that'd be good to probably clarify that, but thank you, appreciate that. That's all I have.
Okay, thank you.
All right, we are moving to the next question in queue. Gary, your line is unmuted. You may go ahead.
I think it's me, Gary Holdsworth, SCE. Can you hear me?
Yep, Gary, we hear you.
Great. So I apologize if this has been covered in the, in your write-up. I was just thinking out loud and wanted to bounce an idea. So if a project is parked and they come out of parking, right, and then submit an MMA, they can still do that. There's nothing
Correct.
that says that they cannot do that, right? This is just while they're officially parked. There's restrictions on the kind of modifications that can be proposed. That's the idea here?
That's correct.
Okay. Great. I was just, double checking, and for all practical purposes, a customer might just decide, okay, I'm going to unpark and then do a big MMA.
That happens anyways.
Right. Okay. Very good.
Thanks, Gary.
There are no additional questions in queue.
Okay, thank you. Let's move to the next slide. And this slide just provides a listing of the remaining components of the phase one topics that are in the final proposal that were not revised in the final proposal. And I don't necessarily plan on going through each of these items, but just wanted to open it up to see if there are any questions related to these items before we move on.
We do have a question in queue. Susan, your line is unmuted. You may go ahead.
Hi, Bob. I just have a clarification on the deliverability transfer opportunities, and it's mainly just it really is just a clarification. There was some discussion in the proposal, and I was a little confused by it, but then I looked at the tariff language and I thought maybe it was okay, where he talked about keeping the proposal the same, but then not redefining the point of interconnection. So it seems like a project can still, just based on what's in the tariff language, the project can still transfer deliverability to another project at the same substation and voltage level. It's just that you're not going to redefine, I didn't even actually understand you were going to do that in the first place, but you're not going to redefine the definition of point of interconnection, but that doesn't really change this proposal, right? Or the basic proposal.
Yeah, that's correct.
My understanding.
Okay, so point of interconnection, that definition will stay the same, but your proposal also stays the same, which is same substation, same voltage level, transfers okay.
Correct. Once we looked at the tariff language, we determined that we didn't need to change the definition. We could go ahead and handle the entire change just by refining the deliverability section in the GDAP.
Okay, and I looked at tariff language. I thought that seemed sufficient as well. So, okay, thank you.
We do have one additional question in queue. Sanjay, go ahead. Your line is unmuted.
Sandra Drew from Greenbright. I have a comment on the deliverability transfer opportunity. So right now the language is the same substation and same voltage level. ISO may consider to be more restricting than that, because if there is a sectionalized bus configuration, even at the same substation and same voltage level, the impact could be quite different. One example is SCE's Winston substation, 230 kV. The bus is split depending on which section the project is on. Their impact to or their capability of get deliverability is quite different.
All right, thank you for that, Sonia.
All right, there are no additional questions in queue.
Okay, let's move to the next slide. So this is the schedule moving forward for phase one and phase two. I think it's pretty self-evident what the process for phase one is at this point. Bill will be talking about the draft tariff language, and he is accepting comments, written comments for that. they're due on May 5th. For phase 2, I just want to point out that we're talking about having the next proposal come out on the 6th, June 7th. We may actually move that back to, rather than being a draft final proposal, do a revised draw proposal on that one. So, and that all of those phase 2 topics will go to the board in October. So, is there any questions on the schedule?
We do have a question in queue. Susan, your line is unmuted. You may go ahead.
Hi, Bob. This is Susan. Yeah, I was going to point out the 6th versus the 7th, so it would obviously be nice to have the extra day, but, you know, the other thing question I had sort of about phase 2 in general is there some of the proposals that were initially, and maybe this is what you're talking about when you're talking about walking it back maybe to a revised straw proposal, but some of the phase 2 proposals were more sort of concept and not quite, I guess, for lack of a better way to phrase it, not quite as concrete as some of the things in phase 1, which is probably why you pushed them off into phase 2. So are you open, are you pretty much set on the scope for phase 2 based on what was tendered earlier or discussed earlier? Are you expecting maybe some new topics to either come from the CAISO or be suggested by stakeholders? Or what's your thought about the scope of phase 2?
We were planning on at least considering some very minor new topics for phase 2 coming from the ISO. So if you have some additional topics that you think are reasonable to take up, you know, midstream, if you will, within phase 2 that could be completed in a quick time frame, I think we can at least consider those.
Okay. Would it be helpful to send those along sort of more informally, or should we do that? Wait till you see what the straw proposal is, and then, or the revised straw proposal, and then to sort of respond? And that would be would that be the proper form to suggest anything?
Yeah, I would prefer that you send something informally now so we can consider it and know that going into the scope of the next paper.
Okay, great. Thanks very much.
All right. There are no additional questions in queue.
All right. Well, thank you, everybody. And at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Bill Weaver. And next slide.
So you can go ahead. You are unmuted.
Yeah, thank you. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Should be looking at the definition section. Is this a good? Are we zoomed in? Well,
it's pretty good. If you could zoom in a little bit more, that would be good. Maybe 125. Yeah, it's a little better. Yep. Perfect.
Okay.
Thank you.
Well, good morning, everyone. Happy EDAM Straw Proposal Day. Just an exciting day here at the CAISO. Just some housekeeping on the Ipair provisions. You know, these are changeable up until we file them at FERC, so long as they're consistent with the board-approved policy. Comments are due next week, and then I will try to repost based on those comments as soon as possible. I don't think we really have time for another call unless there are very expansive revisions, but I don't foresee that. But I'll try to repost an incremental set as soon as possible after comments, and then I may reach out to individual stakeholders if there are outstanding issues or they have special requests or anything. But as always, feel free to call or email me directly with any questions or incremental comments right up until we file at FERC. I'm happy to hear you out. The plan for FERC is we'll probably file shortly after board approval to get these in the tariff in time for the next, for the next steps for cluster 14 and the next TPD allocation cycle, I would estimate, we file no later than June 1st. The edits, let's see, I've only made a couple incremental edits since we've posted, and we'll see those as we go through. One is just to make it a little more clear that the site exclusivity refundability portions, those will only apply going forward. So if you're an interconnection customer, you've already put in a site exclusivity deposit, that's still fully refundable, with the exception of how it'll apply for cluster 14. Second, on the emergency generation, the 1 million cap, will add language similar to the RNU reimbursement cap, saying that number will float up, with inflation and cost increases. I don't want to get to it. I don't want to have to use it 15 years from now and find out, it's worth $30 based on inflation. So that's it. But other than that, I will go through these, I think, pretty quickly. I'm not going to read everything. I'll just kind of float through it, and we'll see, please ping me if there are questions at any point. But otherwise, I think reading these one by one is close to watching paint dry. But I'll try to go somewhat slow, because I also know that whipping fast through this is like, I don't know, Formula One helmet cam or something, and pretty nauseating. Okay, so with that said, yep.
Hey, Bill, there's already 2 questions, I think, lined up. I don't know if you want them now or later.
No, sure, let's go. Thanks, Steve.
All right. Songji, your line is unmuted. You may go ahead.
Songji from Grapevine. Bill, I have a question on the screen you're showing. So do you want to go over those first? Then I'll ask a question about this is about the RES definition as RNU.
No, go ahead, Sanja. I mean,
okay.
Everyone's had this time to see it.
Okay. So I understand this draft language, but I just have some questions. RES, this term RES is used broadly outside the generation interconnection process. So I just feel it's weird to define the RES using a term that's narrowly in the generation interconnection process. And secondly, I feel that this definition could be contradictory. RES, the issues that RES try to protect or mitigate, in most of cases, can also be mitigated through congestion management. So I think RES is rather an exception to the original definition of cannot be adequately mitigated through congestion management. So just something for you to consider. Maybe it's better to include the RES as in the RNU definition itself instead of arranging it this way.
Okay, thanks, Sanja. I'm taking my own notes here. So, yeah, that could be interesting. Okay. Yeah, understood. I think it is confusing. Ultimately, we're just trying to make it clear that RESs will be RNUs 100% of the time. But I think the goal in taking it, first of all, I think it was important to take out SPS, which is synonymous with RAS, as kind of this exception. And then ultimately, I want to get away from listing specific things in RNUs and just make it a definition of what it is and what it does. But yeah, let me take that back to the group and see what we think. Certainly makes sense.
All right, we're moving to the next question in queue. Susan, your line is unmuted. You may go ahead.
Yeah, hi, Bill. Actually, I maybe I'm starting to get the answer from just listening to you and Sanju, but the reason for taking out the SPS reference under RNU, when that seems, well, anyway, can you, is that because an SPS is going to be defined as an RNU, or is that why the SPS is taken out of here?
So, as far as I'm aware, SPS and RAS are basically synonymous. I think most of the country says SPS, and RAS is a more California term, although engineers will often get on and say, you know, site differences that still sound the same. So to that, if you look at the SPS definition and the RAS definition for that matter, they both refer to each other. They both say, you know, RASs are also referred as SPSs. SPS is the same as a RAS. So having it in here as something that that's saying it's not an RNU would be confusing and doesn't make sense. This is pretty old anachronistic language, and so we're just trying to clarify which set of facilities constitute an RNU here.
Okay, so the reason you're taking the SPS out of this part, the first paragraph there, is because the SPS is defined as an RNU, and you're listing things here that are not RNUs. Is that right?
That's right. I mean, it says that an RNU is something that cannot be mitigated through an SPS, but yeah.
Okay, and then my other question was sort of, and I apologize, this is a stupid non-engineer question, but yeah, the definition, I usually see RAS and SPS as interchangeable, but the definition is slightly different. And if they are actually different things, that makes sense. If they're actually interchangeable, they should be probably, maybe they should have the same definition. I mean, it's so, anyway, I find it confusing to say that they're all sometimes referred to as the other, but then the definition is slightly different.
Yeah, I'm with you right there. Actually, you know, I think what I'll take back to the group is whether we should just cut SPS altogether, because I don't really think we use that term that much anymore. We just generally say RAS. I think SPS we might have got from Order 2003 or somewhere. We generally say RAS, and I'm not even sure we need the SPS in the tariff anymore. So maybe that would be the better change.
Okay. Well,
I think it's a little confusing.
It's fine to leave them both in, but if you define them differently and say one is sometimes referred to as the other, that seems contradictory. That's all I'm saying about this. So I don't have an opinion by whether you leave them both in or not, but if they're the same thing or they really are interchangeable, they should have the same definition. But putting different definitions in and saying they're sometimes called the other one is a little confusing.
Yeah, I understand that, although it's definitely true.
Okay. All right. But then are they the same thing or are they not the same thing? In which case, why don't they have the same definition? So anyway, just a suggestion for clarification. That's not a huge issue in general.
Okay. Thanks.
Thanks.
All right. I do not see any additional questions in queue, but I do see something in the chat. Would you like me to read the chat aloud, or do you guys see that?
Yeah. I'm just looking at I'm just looking at a giant RAS definition, so that'd be helpful.
Okay. So let's see. The question is, let's see, from WECC. The terms SPS and RAS are often used interchangeably, but historically, WECC has used the term RAS. NERC has recently adopted the RAS terminology in the 2015 definition, and PRC-012-2 standard is in the process of retiring special protection systems. And you'll be able to see that question if I didn't read it correctly, Bill. If you hover over the top of your screen and click on chat, the little icon, you'll be able to see, just in case I, mispronounced any of the acronyms. You can see that.
Nope, that sounded correct to me, and thank you. It was a very helpful comment. So, maybe we should move to getting away from SPS. Okay. Moving on, I think this is the entirety of the tariff provisions for that proposal. You'll see for site exclusivity, we have, we've got away from land, because I guess these could be on C now. and so that we'll specify in the BPM. I've also struck this language on final non-appealable permit because that's just, I think that's too expansive. That's so far beyond what is actually the case for public sites. Everything is appealable for a very, very long time. Okay. Site exclusivity deposit, same thing, just really changing this to its new proper care provisions, updating that. SPS, yeah, I mean, I think we covered this pretty well. Moving on here, this is the timing for the wholesale distribution transfers. I try to draft this as as flexible as possible. So it's basically, rather than give a hard date, that may not always be the case. We've tried to just limit this to when, to allow these transfers as long as we can until we can't fit them into the next phase 1 study. Moving on. Changing
now we have one caller in the queue.
Yep, go ahead.
Operator, can you please open the line?
I'm sorry, I'm talking on mute. Sorry, guys. Sonja, you may go ahead.
Okay, Sonja from Grapevine again. Bill, for this transferring from WDAT to PISO, it reads like that it only allowed when the IC made a mistake about their POI. And sometimes at the scoping meeting, the PTO will recommend the IC to change their POI from the distribution side to the transmission side. That should be allowed as well, right?
Yeah, that would be allowed as well. I mean, I think I hear what you're saying. I think it would still fit into this definition, but maybe we can make it a little more expansive. The tariff already has language about when the PTO reclassifies the lines, but I hear what you're saying. Let me just take that note.
Thank you.
All right, I don't see any additional questions in queue.
Okay. These are the new amounts, rates for itself, for its exclusivity, including BPM examples. Let's see. This is kind of just cleanup, just because it kind of spoke expansively to.
It looks like Sonji has another question for you, Bill.
To downsizing. Yeah, sure.
Yeah, if you scroll up to the previous page, I think the public land should be public site. Yeah, right here.
Yep. Good catch, Sonja. Oops. Get back in this. Okay, thanks. This is the site exclusivity deposit language. You'll see these. This text in red is what I've added after we posted, but before this call, and this is to clarify that it's really only for new site exclusivity deposits for clusters 15 and thereafter, although you'll see when we get down to the cluster 14 specific language, it has its own provisions for those, even if they've already made them how to proceed. So pretty straightforward, 50% non-refundable, including the interest. And as Bob said, at any point, if the interconnection customer demonstrates site exclusivity, they would receive a full deposit.
All right, we do have another question in queue.
Sure.
All right. Susan, your line is unmuted. You may go ahead.
Yeah, where it says the interconnection customer may not use site exclusivity deposits after the phase 1 study, I mean, technically they can use it until 10 days before this financial security posting is due. So they can use it for 90 days after the phase 1 study.
Okay.
Anyway, it's a bit of a nit, but that 90-day period actually might be important for that demonstration to happen.
Okay, that's too much of a note for me to write down. Could you make sure to submit that in written comments?
I've got it in my markup already. Thanks.
Okay, thank you.
All right, there are no additional questions in queue.
Okay, third-party interconnection facilities. You'll see this language is a little more flexible than I think we saw in the previous policy papers, simply because there are various legal ways to obtain service on someone else's, gen-tie, and I've also expanded that to interconnection facilities generally, lest there's confusion about what is a gen-tie, which is a common industry term, but not a tariff term. Interconnection facilities a little broader, a little more expansive, and what we're talking about. But basically, I've tried to make this more flexible rather than providing an agreement per se. This can also be, simply just demonstrated, for example, through, there are ways to file things at FERC to effectively force the interconnection customer to give you capacity if it's available, although that's become much harder in recent years, so don't get any ideas. But ultimately, try to make this flexible so that it's not too much of a hindrance, and yet you need to be thinking about it if you're going to use someone else's gen-tie.
We do have a question in queue.
Go ahead.
Gary,
your line is unmuted. You may go ahead.
It's Gary Holdsworth at SCE. Nothing here is going to stop our current practice. Our current practice at SCE for shared facilities, including interconnection facilities or distribution upgrades or even network upgrades, but mostly interconnection facilities like gen-ties, is through the use of a shared facilities agreement that the parties will enter into that is reflected in the GIA, the existence of that agreement. SCE is not a party to the shared facilities agreement, but we do refer to it in our GIA. And there's obviously nothing here is going to stop that practice currently. Just realize that you mentioned an agreement. By the time an interconnection agreement is executed, we're, at least as far as SCE is concerned, we're going to want to see a shared facilities agreement among the parties.
Yeah, I don't see any change here to that practice because these new requirements apply well before the GIA.
Right.
And
right.
Yeah, okay.
Just double checking that, and that all sounds good. I just, it was just a reassurance. Thank you.
All right, there are no additional questions in queue.
Okay, the emergency interconnection process, very similar to what we saw in the proposals. You'll see this text in red. I did add the annual inflation factor, which is just a copy from how it's written in the R&U reimbursement cap. But otherwise, this is the same. I'll say I think we've received some questions. We've received questions on the money amount, how that would work in the tariff, and hopefully the the inflation factor addresses those comments. We've also received questions on, on what it means, what the proclamation or declaration, if there's any, magic words that we're have to be looking for. And I'll say the way this is written isn't looking for necessarily something, that says, per se capacity or energy or something, but, it does require that, the genesis of using this process is, a specific written action by the governor's office. And that's, we are on the same page as comments in that we don't want this to be used outside of these very specific instances, such as we had last year. And because, we feel that with the modification process, the repowering process, fast track independent study, and the amount of capacity we have in development in queue, that the rest of the tariff should be able to accommodate these interconnection customers and these emergency cases. If we look at last year, for example, it was only the existing queue accommodated, I think, 51 of the 60 megawatts that were brought online. It was only making sure we had that extra 9 that we even needed a waiver at FERC. So we hope and anticipate that the rest of the tariff will continue to accommodate these, but otherwise we only want to use this in very specific cases.
We do have a question here.
Yep, go ahead.
All right. Susan, your line is unmuted. You may go ahead.
Hi, Bill. I just had a few questions. On letter E here, it seems like there should be probably some kind of specification that says that no DNUs can be triggered or something like that, or no DNUs would be provided. It talks about RNUs, but doesn't may have any limitation about DNUs. That might be obvious from the rest of the things that are here, but anyway, it just seems perhaps that could be clarified as well. And then when you get down to right below letter I, it seems like this is all being discussed as though it was a modification. If you could scroll down just a minute, a little bit.
Susan, it's Deb.
Okay.
Can we back up for a second? The reason why we don't need to put the DNU in there is because underneath item number G, emergency interventions are ineligible for deliverability.
Okay, well then maybe that means the same thing. It just seemed logical if you're talking about limitations on RNUs, maybe to just be clear about the DNUs. But yeah, I agree. It's probably covered under that and a couple of the other places. But just a clarification suggestion. Okay, and then under letter I there, it seems like there's a whole lot of discussion about this. First, it talks about interconnection, and then the rest of it talks about a modification assessment. And I think it sounds like, this really seems like it is a new interconnection request. It's a particular kind of one, but it's not a modification. It's an actual interconnection request, right? Sort of a kind of one anyway.
Yeah, you're totally right. I think that's just, I'll give you two guesses where I got the language from, just trying to be consistent. But I should clean that up because you're right. And then on your DNU question, I agree with both you and Debbie. I think it probably at least warrants a BPM clarification, if not putting something in the tariff. So we'll take that back.
Okay, thanks. That's all I had.
All right, there are no additional questions at this time.
Okay. This is the deposit language. There we go. This is the only tariff provisions for clarifying the extent to which you can change sites and POI, following scoping. And modifications, see, most of the pages of these tariff provisions are striking downsizing and even left out half of the appendices for that. And then this is just the new provision simplifying how interconnection customers can request to downsize. We added the November 30th deadline just as a clear marker of when you would need to submit one of these to guarantee being included in the subsequent reassessment rather than submitting it after and having to get kicked a whole year down the road. Okay.
We do have additional questions in queue, Bill.
Okay.
All right. Sanju, your line is unmuted. You may go ahead.
Yeah, so for 6727, I think the final proposal talks about if the cost impact can be determined without study, it will be approved immediately, shown in the MMA approval. So I think it's not clear here. It sounds like everything has to go through the reassessment, annual reassessment to determine the cost impact.
Yeah, I think you're right there. Let me see if I can add some clarifying language. I'm just going to take a note. Thank you, Sanjay. I do think it's a little tricky to put in the tariff because it's not always clear when we can make that determination. I guess if they were standalone network upgrades, it would be easier. I'll take it back to the team and see what we can do.
Okay, thanks.
All right, we're moving to the next question in queue. Susan, your line is unmuted. You may go ahead.
Yeah, hi, Bill. Actually, I had that question and that comment and one more. We'll go ahead and suggest some language for you. I think you can keep it very general here about if the request can be evaluated under the regular MMA process, then it would, and timeline, then it would be. Otherwise, it goes into the reassessment. So I think we'll suggest some language just for your consideration. But I don't think you have to make it very specific, just, as sort of up to the ISO's discretion. So we'll be okay with that. And then I'm glad you put the November 30th date in here. That was really an important clarification. You might actually also maybe even further clarify it by saying if anything coming in by after November 30th will go into the next reassessment, rather than do they have to, they can still submit it, and you'll hold on to it, I guess, and then just assess it the next time. So that might be a clarification, but we'll go ahead and suggest that as well.
Okay, thanks. Yeah. Okay, I'm going to move on here. I think some stakeholder, just because we're in the modifications section, someone also commented that, the modification section of the Git app is very important, but it's a little muddled because it originally kind of grew out of the allowable modifications between phase 1 and phase 2, and you kind of have to do this calculation of, well, if you're not in these sets, then you have to be in this MMA set, and wouldn't it make more sense just to have a nice, clean, standalone MMA provision? And I think that's a great suggestion, but I think it would have to move around a lot of tariff, and so just defer. It's something on my list for phase 2 of IPE. So we can go through that with stakeholders, but I thought that was a good comment and plan to do it in the future. Okay. Commercial viability criteria, no, I think hard changes here other than removing the downsizing reference. Substantial errors and omissions. You'll see these are in line with the policy we've described, making it a little more clear when the cutoff is and how that impacts interconnection financial security after second posting. The or in this language, I think it was ambiguous how that would work, and so it made it more clear and that for any of these and the PTO facilities, if the aggregate is above $1 million or 5%, that would trigger the substantial provisions.
We
same
do have
thing here,
questions.
making the date. Thanks. Yeah, I'll just get through this. Same thing here is that kind of given the most flexible language too on which of the CODs or ISDs or delivery status is being impacted, and then clarifying, I think, what's always been the case, that changes to studies that result from interconnection customer requests, those are not errors and omissions. All right. Any questions?
All right. We'll go to questions. Sanjay, your line is unmuted. You may go ahead.
Okay, Bill, my question is on the previous section on the commercial viability criteria. I see that there isn't a change there. So does that mean the proposal about modification to CVC is actually a BPM change?
Yes, good question. Yeah, there was no change in policy there. So, I think isn't in the draft board memo, and there were no necessary tariff revisions for it. So what will it do? And I would say too, I think interconnection customers, don't want us to try to get into that in the tariff, that it might, restrict us, where currently we kind of have the most expansive, most generous policy for making that test. And so it's better for us to put examples in the BPMs of, these are the cases, these are the things we consider PTO caused delays, and these are the cases where, it would be caused by the interconnection customer.
Thanks for the clarification.
Mm-hmm.
All right.
Yeah, good question.
No. We have an additional question from Susan. Go ahead, Susan. Your line is unmuted.
Yeah, I had a question on the same provision, actually, but I'm not coming down the same place where you are. And it's just a simple change, but if you go back to the first line of that provision, 6.7.4, I agree with you. You don't want to get into some bloody detail here, but I think if you just made it clear that these are the CAISO's agreements to modifications requested by the interconnection customer pursuant to whatever, blah, 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 blah. I think if you just make it clear that this has to be with, this provision applies to a modification requested by the interconnection customer, and then clarify in the BPM that, the PTO delay is not requested by the interconnection customer. It's something they have to put up with. So I think that we'll go ahead and put in a suggestion just for a quick clarification here, just to make it clear that this is only when the modification is requested by the customer. So if that will work. Right. Okay, and then if you could go scroll back down to where you were, further down where you were there. Okay, yeah, right there. Okay, so where the word "or" there, I'm sorry, scrolling back up just a little bit. I thought you had taken out "or" just because, it's this, or this. Not that you had any reason other than that to take out the word "or." Is that, I wasn't quite sure what happened with given the discussion with Sanjay earlier.
Let's see. We're talking about Roman at 1.
Yes.
Yeah. So or is always disjunctive. Like if I invite Bob or Steve to my party, only one of them is coming. If I invite Bob and Steve to my party, they can both come, or either can come. So this, I think the policy where it used to say "or," it could have been interpreted that you needed one of these changes to apply completely in the bucket. So let's throw 5% out. But like if you had a $750,000 change to interconnection facilities and a $250,000 change to your network upgrades, we might get in the case where someone's going to argue that that doesn't qualify as a substantial error omission because it needs to hit the million in one or the other, and having the "and" means that they can aggregate up. It just I think clarifies what has always been the intent.
Yeah, but you crossed out "or," and that's why I was. What you have at the beginning is fine, and you can just list them without any connectors between them because you have one or more of the following, and then you just list 3 things. You don't have to connect them with an "or" or an "and." You just list them.
Oh, I'm sorry. We're talking about something different. I was talking about the "or" that's here.
Okay.
With these between. Are you talking about this "or"? Well,
yeah, that's what I thought you were talking about. So yes, that's what I was talking about. And you really don't need to do either or any of these because you already said there's 3 things here, and it's one or more of the following, and then you just say what they are and not have to connect them to each other. So I don't know. Anyway, sorry, that was a little bit of a nit.
Yeah. No, that's fine with me.
Okay, and then I wanted to just address the last line right before 6.8.2. If there are changes that are required because of the error or omission, that might be a little too complicated here, but it could happen that because, now that, it turns out now that I can't do something, my COD is delayed by 4 years, I may have to do something else. Or now if, something, if there's an error and something costs a lot more than I thought it was going to, now I have to change something. Then it seems like if they're caused from the error or omission, they should still be considered one, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and I think that's the case because, the revised study report is always going to precede a change that would be responding to the revision, right? So you've already triggered this provision before you're going to make a change. On the other hand, if I, push my COD 4 years out and that, dramatically changes study results, well, that's not an error omission.
Well, okay, but let's say, again, I don't want to get too esoteric here, but let's say, it turns out you're going to interconnect to one place or in one way or with a particular gen type, and it turns out or something happens, and it turns out that whatever you were going to do is going to cost a lot more money. And so now you have to put in the change to do something. You had another option, but you didn't take it because you didn't know that would be so expensive. The first one would be so expensive, so then you do it. So that is a change resulting from the customer request, but the customer request resulted from the error omission. So is there, I don't know. Anyway, yeah, I'll think more about this, but it seems like I'm not sure what that last statement is really intended to prevent or avoid.
Yeah, I think we're just clarifying that just because you receive a revision to an interconnection study, it's not always going to be the case that it was an error omission. Error omissions are usually, through no fault of the interconnection customer, you've done nothing, and yet your study results have changed. These provisions are triggered. But I think we're okay, because I think your concern just couldn't happen because anyone making changes like this provision does not, you don't negate the error omission language and your rights under that language just because you make a change to respond to it thereafter.
Okay. All right. Okay. I'll give some more thought to that, but thanks. I'll thank you.
And just to pick up the rest of the language. Oh, thank you. Just to pick up the rest of the language here, this is the clarification after the second posting. Your cost responsibilities are still locked in. Same thing here. And this is just a change of, I had 100 and 100, and for whatever reason, the GitHub has always written these out. But this is the 100% refund provision, saying that if you do receive a substantial error omission after you've posted, you're eligible for the 100% refund if you decide to withdraw within 60 days. Otherwise, this would not apply. This is the Appendix B revisions. Pretty simple. Getting Appendix B's in on time. Appendices B, I should say. Reassessment, this is no change to the reassessment, just kind of, again, simplifying the downsizing language. I'm going to scroll. Everyone close your eyes while I scroll through this. This is so much downsizing language. Okay. That was just all cutting downsizing language. Non-refundable amounts, there's no real change here other than it had this, it kind of said it was just all, and that worried me as referring to all study deposits, and now the site exclusivity deposit has, its own revision. I'll come back and see whether I might want to clarify this is kind of make it more clear that this is prospectively, with the exception of cluster 14. And then as we proposed, we've put the non-refundable portions in with how we allocate non-refundable interconnection financial security. And all right, now the big one, TPD. So we changed the groups, although I noticed I still had ABC4, now it's D, struck 4. And I think, we addressed a lot of the questions on this. This definitely would apply to, so the group 4 provisions apply to seeking. Most of these things here in this paragraph are just about who can trigger. I think if you looked at this in simple markup and compared it to the old 8.9.2, my goal here was to make it shorter and much more clear, much simpler on triggering DNUs, energy only, and the groups themselves. I mean, you'll see how much we cut. Just the green always signifies that it was moved.
Bill, we do have 2 callers in the queue.
Mm-hmm.
All right, Susan, your line is unmuted. You may go ahead.
Yeah, I want to say that the paragraph after D4, I found just incredibly confusing. And this is why I asked Bob earlier the comment about energy-only allocations after PCDS and FCDS within a particular allocation group, because I read this through a few times, and it seemed like you were saying the energy only would come after all of the PCDS and FCDS, not just within an allocation group. So this was very confusing. Also, there's a reference to a reassessment study, and I couldn't figure out how the reassessment study was related to this. And then there's the last sentence talks about the ISO will allocate TP deliverability from already planned upgrades, or will allocate TP deliverability from upgrades assigned to an interconnection project that has been executed GIA and currently has a anyways. I found this just incredibly confusing. We'll suggest some language, but I'm sure you're trying to be efficient here. But references to reassessments, and this was really unclear, I thought.
Okay. Well, yeah, you see a lot. I mean, nearly all of this is existing language, and then the green was just existing moved from elsewhere. But yeah, happy to take a look.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, no, I think so. I mean, with the many revisits we've had in IPE to the TPD process over the years, I think, some Frankensteining of the language is inevitable, but, happy to try to clean that up as we go along. Next question.
Actually, the other caller did lower their hand, so I think we are done with questions for now.
Okay. All right. This is the power purchase agreement. I think we'll skip to the power purchase agreement and then get back to Group D. But again, specifying the minimum term, clarifying what it means to have a power purchase agreement, not just for seeking an allocation under Group A, but also, retaining an allocation if you get one through the other groups as well. These provisions would all apply. Clarifying what, let's see, this is the provision saying that we, if your PPA has its own PPA, or if you've split maybe the RECs and the RA capacity, you or the counterparty can demonstrate that the RA has been sold only through a PPA and not kind of other ways, and that would qualify for having a PPA either for Group A or retaining under Group B or Group D. Anything that requires a PPA. This is just the old Group 3. Left this in just for simplicity's sake, and really the only changes you see here are to kind of remove the prospective language about new Group 3 allocations, which won't happen now that Group D exists. Okay. So this is going to be a historic section that we'll take out one day once all these old Group 3 customers are done. Okay, and then here we have Group D, which I think it aligns with what Bob said on the policy that it is seeking and applies to the whole project. On the other hand, we've made it clear that any portion that receives a PPA is basically free of all these restrictions immediately. The idea being that once you have a PPA, we really don't need to try to, your risk of lingering in queue while you seek a PPA for that capacity is gone. Again, same thing. If you receive a full allocation, up to the full of what you requested, then you have to accept or withdraw, and that this would not be for capacity that is energy only starting in 2023, 24.
We do have a question in queue.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Susan, your line is unmuted. You may go ahead.
Yeah, I had a question about the second paragraph where it says, so long as the power purchase agreement remains effective. And that seems a little contrary to what the CAISO is doing the rest of these group A, B, C, D things, where once the project gets the PPA, there isn't any retention requirement to demonstrate anything after that. So so in this case, unlike say Group A or Group B, where if you get a PPA, that's it. There's no more retention requirement. Here, you have to demonstrate that the power purchase agreement remains effective. And is that until COD or after COD, or what's the requirement there?
Yeah, I understand your comment.
I apologize.
I'm thinking elsewhere in the tariff we have provisions saying that if you lose your PPA at any time, you have to notify us.
Well, wouldn't those go away?
I hear you. I understand. Why don't you submit that in written comments, and we'll take it back and think about it.
Okay. All right. Yeah, it seems it's going the other direction here, so we'll definitely do that. Thanks.
I understand. Thanks.
There are no additional questions.
Okay. 15-second break while I write a couple notes for myself. Okay. Retaining, as we just talked about, this is mostly gutted because the retention process was cumbersome, and we were mostly just getting either perfect success or the occasional false negative, which wasn't good for anyone. So we've just kind of reduced this down to the shortlist show us your PPA requirement. Same thing, Group D, within the next, shortlist within a year, PPA within 2 years from the allocation. And yeah, applies on a capacity basis. Okay. Although the Group D restrictions apply to the whole project, unless they have a PPA for that portion. Okay. Same thing here, just getting rid of the old retention provisions pre-cluster 10, which hopefully we don't really use anymore.
So we do have one caller. You?
Yeah, let me get through this one, and then because I think after that we're going to move on to other topics. But if at any time interconnection customer has received or retained TPD by attesting it as a power purchase agreement and loses it, it can get its have its DNUs removed and reduce its interconnection financial security for the DNU portion. Okay, questions?
All right, Susan, your line is unmuted. You may go ahead.
Hi, I had a question on, if you go back up to 8.9.3, the couple paragraphs after number 5 that's in there. Okay. You've got the November 30th date in here, but I thought the CAISO had changed. I don't remember if it was this initiative or the COMA initiative, but had changed that November 30th date for retention and all those requirements to the date of the due date of the affidavit, and not the November 30th date.
Yeah, you could be right about that. If you could submit that in written comments, I'll take a look.
Okay, I'll do that. And then the paragraph that starts failure, is there some, you've crossed out the last sentence, and I was wondering what that meant. Why did you cross that out?
I'm sorry, let's see.
The very last sentence that says failure to meet the requirements of this section. Why did you cross out the last sentence?
I'm struggling to, failure to meet the requirements of the section is still in. It's right here.
For a portion. Oh, so you just moved the one from the last sentence, you just moved it up to that sentence.
Yeah.
Okay, all right, I was trying to figure out what you were making a change to in crossing out the last one. Okay, all right, and yeah, I think that's what, okay, I think that's what I have so far. Thanks so much. That's it.
Okay, thanks, Susie.
We do have an additional question in queue, Bill.
Yep. Go ahead.
Get that. Perfect. Ian, your line is unmuted. You may go ahead.
Hi, Bill. This is Ian Kearney speaking on behalf of Golden State Clean Energy. I asked a question earlier on the policy paper. I just want to connect the dots here to the tariff language. I asked about the exception to the restrictions for Group D. The paper says, if you receive a partial allocation via Groups A or B, then that portion's not, subject to these Group D restrictions. It looks like the second paragraph in 8.9.2.3 is what's contemplating that, but it only speaks to projects with a PPA. So how does the Group B shortlisting fall within that, or even, the clarification I got was if you've gotten deliverability from any source, including balance sheet financing for projects that are, doing an MMA and applying to Group D this fall for the one time they could, how would that be contemplated in this tariff?
Yeah, Group A or B, to retain the deliverability, let's see, if you were a Group A customer, you have a PPA, and so you're instantly relieved from the Group D restrictions for that capacity by the PPA revision. Mm-hmm. For a Group B allocation, it would apply in the next year where you have to show the allocation, you have to show the PPA, or it's out. But I don't disagree. Maybe we need more clarifications here. Because I think the partial allocations are tricky, and we had that table that already had 22 examples. We thought if we added partial allocations, we'd get into the hundreds. But no point taken. If you could submit that in written comments, maybe we'll try to clean this up.
Sure. Yeah. Just want to make sure I wasn't missing anything. It looks like it could use a small addition there, so I'll take that back.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks. Just writing a note real quick. Okay, and let's see. I think we were here. I'll remind my team that I can't, I'm sharing my screen, so I can't see the inter-ISO chat. I'm hearing beeps. Let's see. Okay, we're in parking. These are the permissible parking changes. This is consistent with what Debbie said, to just avoid unnecessary work for projects that'll likely, withdraw or make other substantial changes after, based on the TPD results. We did receive comments about PTAs, and so we put that in expressly. Never contemplated removing those. Okay.
And Bill, just a second on that. Susan, sure. With respect to deliverability transfers while parked, I answered based on it being all the way back in section 8.9.9, but I've had a chance to review both the GitApp and the BPM, And in order to effectuate the deliverability transfer, it's an MMA. So I think that we need to not allow deliverability transfers while you're parked. I think it's just another, you know, adding one more thing in. And if you're parked because of your you don't have deliverability is why you're not moving forward. I guess I'm not understanding why you would be transferring deliverability because the whole project itself is parked. And Susan, I see you've raised your hand. So operator, if you could open up your line, that would be great.
Well, I'll jump in and say, you know, Debbie, I think you're talking about, yeah, you can, if you're parked, you cannot assign deliverability to someone else. Susan might be talking about if you're parked, can you receive an interconnection, a deliverability transfer?
Okay, so can you hear me? Am I on?
Yes.
Sure.
Okay. Okay, I guess I have, given that your overall objective here is to try to limit things to, limit changes here so that you're limiting the burden for projects that may, in fact, drop out anyway. Then I have this sort of a general problem with only allowing project, you know, some of the things you're allowing actually require analysis and some of the things you're not allowing don't. So the whole idea of managing the workload seems, it just seems inconsistent in general. And this is maybe one of those cases where, yes, okay, maybe it's classified as an MMA, but, you know, well, to Bill's point, yeah, if you can get deliverability from some other project, you could actually probably come at, you know, I mean, that would seem like it's something you'd actually want to be able to allow people to do. Or if you want to be able to transfer deliverability to another project, maybe so you could drop out, maybe you should allow people to do that. It's not, you don't require analysis to do this. It's like I said, it's just a calculator. That's all you need. So allowing someone to do this while, or even particularly within a project, you know, well, instead of waiting for the allocation that I'm going to do for this part of the project, I'm just going to come out of parking and do that. It just seems the philosophy is inconsistent, but also this particular thing is not, I understand a person has to actually sit there with the calculator and do the math, but it's not a big deal to do it. And it could make the project either more marketable or decide to go some other direction. I'm not understanding why you wouldn't allow somebody to do that.
So it's not somebody with a calculator, Susan. What ends up happening is that we have to go ahead and see if the deliverability can be transferred. Then we have to go over and talk to the transmission planning engineers. If they agree, then we have to update the base cases as to who's got the deliverability. And then letters have to be written. They have to be approved by the PTOs along with the ISO. There's still a whole process that goes with it. It's not a, yep, calculator, you're good. I think if you're getting deliverability from somebody, then it's that somebody is going to put in the request, not the parked project. So they're not parked. They're allowed to do it underneath section 8.9.9.
Okay, so you allow somebody to, so somebody could, to Bill's point, a project could receive deliverability without putting in an MMA request and while they're parked. Yes? I just want to make sure, I'm not trying to challenge it, I just want to make sure I understood.
So to the extent that there is a project that is not parked and wants to give deliverability to a parked project, it can do that.
And the parked project can receive the deliverability without filing an MMA request and while they are parked.
Because they don't file the MMA request. The MMA request is filed by the project that is giving the deliverability. Okay, and so it's okay to accept it while you're parked. I understand there may be no active acceptance. It just, the thing just shows up. So, yeah.
Okay. Okay. All right. Anyway, the overall philosophy still seems strange, but I do appreciate the clarification. Thank you.
All right. Let's see. We will go to flow timeline, deliverability transfers. They're right next to each other. So same thing, we've struck POI and changed it to same substation and same voltage level. Here, those would both need to apply. We did not change the POI language because, the POI is not always at the substation, and POI is used for a number of other purposes. I thought it was unnecessary and kind of too expansive to mess with the POI definition. Okay, but getting to cluster 14, getting two new provisions. Excuse me. First on site exclusivity. And second on demonstrating the Gentype. I'm wondering here if I need to, I'm just trying to note to myself that I need to specify that. I think I want to specify that they needed the site exclusivity by date certain. Okay. And then everything else is just removing more downsizing language. And as I put in a footnote somewhere, there's even more downsizing removal than demonstrated here because we have at least one other appendix on that. So that's the tariff provisions. If anyone else has any other questions before you submit comments, please feel free to reach out to me or Sarah Kozel in the legal department. We're happy to talk to you about it and go through anything. Any final questions on tariff? All right, well, thank you for everyone.
Thank you, Bill. Michelle, can you please go back to the presentation?
Yes, one moment.
Thank you. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Looks like there's a delay. Thank you, Michelle. As a reminder, please submit comments on the draft tariff language by end of day May 5th using the commenting tool linked on the initiative webpage. If you have any questions, please contact ISO Stakeholder Affairs at kaiso.com. Next slide, please. Before we close today's meeting, the ISO is pleased to announce this year's Stakeholder Symposium, which will be held in person at the Safe Credit Union Convention Center in downtown Sacramento on November 9th and 10th. Registration for the event will be open in May, and a public notice will be issued once the site is available. If you have any questions, please feel free to contact us at symposiumreg@kaiso.com. Thank you for joining today's discussion. As a reminder, this meeting was recorded for informational and convenience purposes only. The video file will be posted on the initiative webpage for a limited time only after this meeting. We look forward to receiving your comments by end of day May 5th, and have a great rest of your day. Operator, you may now conclude the call.
That concludes our conference. Thank you for using Event Services. You may now disconnect.